Claudia was the kind of person who found comfort in routines. Every Saturday morning, her ritual included a visit to the local supermarket, a small building nestled between the city streets where the noise of traffic turned into a dull background hum. Her path through the aisles was almost always the same, a well-trodden route that took her from fresh produce to detergents to the checkout. However, that Saturday would be different. As she approached the cereal section, a piece of paper abandoned in a corner caught her attention. It was a shopping list, written in tight, neat handwriting. On a sudden impulse, driven by curiosity and a desire to break the monotony of her day, Claudia decided to pick it up. The list contained a series of items: salt, dish detergent, bleach, plant antiparasitic, and a variety of foods. "Let's make it a game," thought Claudia, smiling at the unusual challenge. She began to collect the listed items, moving through the aisles with a new purpose. Each product seemed mundane individually, but as she accumulated them in her cart, a sense of unease began to creep inside her. Salt, detergent, bleach, antiparasitic. There was a strange resonance in that combination, an undertone she couldn't decipher right away. After finishing her shopping, Claudia headed to the checkouts, the list clenched in her hands. While waiting her turn, she reflected on the strangeness of her errand. Who would ever need these items together? She wondered. She couldn't find a satisfactory answer. Once home, she decided to investigate a bit about that combination of products. She turned on her computer and started searching. That's when a chill ran down her spine. Salt, detergent, bleach, antiparasitic. Separately harmless. Together, they could create a dangerously toxic mixture. But why would someone want to buy all these products together? Was the author of that list planning to poison someone? That evening, Claudia couldn't get the idea out of her mind that, by collecting those items, she had unwittingly become an accomplice in a nefarious plan. She decided she had to do something. She returned to the supermarket, hoping to find clues, or perhaps to meet the mysterious author of the list. As soon as she returned to the supermarket, Claudia sought out the manager to share her concerns about the shopping list she had found. She expected understanding, perhaps even gratitude for shedding light on a potential danger. Instead, the manager listened with disconcerting vagueness, offering little more than a distracted glance at the list, and a "I'll take care of it, don't worry," that sounded empty and dismissive. Unsatisfied, Claudia approached another employee, hoping for a different reaction. However, her experience was similar. Formal listening, minimal interest, and no concrete action. This series of reactions left her both frustrated and alarmed. She felt there was something deeper, a danger being ignored. With a growing sense of responsibility, she decided to turn to the police. There, her concerns were taken seriously. The officers listened attentively, nodded in front of the list of items, and started investigating without downplaying her fears. In the weeks that followed, a thorough investigation unveiled a shocking truth. One of the supermarket employees, known for his solitary behavior and some past conflicts, harbored deep resentment towards his boss. This grudge, grown in the shadow of monotonous workdays, had driven him to plan a final act of vengeance, poisoning his superior by putting a lethal mixture of chemicals in a drink during lunch break. The police discovered concrete evidence of the plan through messages saved on the employee's cell phone and testimonials from colleagues who, faced with the severity of the situation, recalled suspicious behaviors and comments made in the past. The employee was arrested before he could carry out his plan, thanks to the timely intervention based on the information provided by Claudia. The news of the arrest spread quickly, eliciting a mix of shock and relief among the supermarket employees and the local community. Claudia was praised for her determination and courage in following her instinct, a decision that had prevented a tragedy. The story I'm about to tell is incredible and connects with the world of the occult and paranormal. Emily was a college student who had just moved to a small town to continue her studies. The town had its own charm, with its cobblestone streets and a small supermarket that seemed straight out of the 1950s movie. It was there that her eyes met Jack's, the boy at the frozen food counter. He had a somewhat neglected appearance, but deep eyes and a shy smile that struck her from the very first moment. During one of her daily visits, Jack found the courage to leave her a note, hidden among the ice cream packages Emily was examining. It was an invitation for coffee, written in elegant handwriting she wouldn't have expected from him. Surprised, but intrigued, Emily accepted. Their meeting was enjoyable, and Jack proved to be an interesting conversationalist, able to make her laugh and think. However, over time, he began to show more insistent behavior. Constant messages, unexpected appearances outside the library or Emily's apartment, attention that quickly became suffocating. Emily began to feel trapped, especially when she noticed that Jack's obsession was manifesting in a disturbing manner at the supermarket too. Every time she entered, she found him at his place, watching her with a fixed gaze, silently following her through the aisles without ever getting too close. The situation escalated when, one evening, Emily found dozens of notes stuck on her car, all with the same message: "I'm watching you." Frightened, she decided to confront Jack to ask him to leave her alone, but he denied any involvement, with a sincerity in his eyes that made her waver. That night, terror knocked on her window. A dark silhouette was staring at her from outside, motionless. She called the police, but when they arrived, they found no one. The officers suggested it might have been a bad dream, but Emily knew it wasn't. In the following days, the appearances and whispers became more frequent and threatening, until she found a message written in lipstick on her front door. "You can't escape me." Desperate, Emily, after some time with a bit of courage, returned to the supermarket to confront Jack, but found his place empty. Asking around, she learned something shocking. Jack had died in a car accident months before, right when Emily had started feeling observed. Shaken by the revelation, Emily realized that what was haunting her was something far darker and inexplicable. The supermarket, with its dark corners and cold air leaking from the refrigerators, had become the stage for an endless nightmare. Emily knew she had to find a way to escape this obsession before it was too late. With a heavy heart and a mind clouded by fear, Emily faced a reality that defied all logic. The idea that Jack's obsession could persist beyond death was something she couldn't understand or accept. Determined to end this nightmare, she began seeking help, turning not only to the police, but also to experts in paranormal phenomena, hoping to find an explanation, or better yet, a solution. Her research led her to discover that the supermarket had been built on land that previously housed an old factory, the site of a tragic accident that had claimed the lives of many workers, including, it was said, a young man in love with the owner's daughter. Past stories suggested that the land was cursed, a place of great sorrow and loss, where restless souls found no peace. Armed with this new knowledge and unshakable determination, Emily decided to confront Jack's spirit directly. One night, after mentally and spiritually preparing herself, she entered the supermarket after closing hours, gaining access thanks to a friend who worked there. The air was cold, and the dark aisles were illuminated by the light of the torch Emily held tightly in her hand. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of her steps and her racing heart. Arriving at the frozen food counter, the place she felt was the center of the energy that bound her to Jack, Emily stopped and, with a trembling but clear voice, began to speak.
"Jack, if you're here, please let me go,"
she said, her words laden with emotion.
"I don't know why you're tied to this place, or to me, but you need to find peace. You have to let us both go."
For what seemed like an eternity, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, a cold wind enveloped her, and the supermarket's lights flickered violently. Emily felt Jack's presence next to her, a dense and sad energy, but not threatening. The appearances and messages stopped that night. Emily, never knew for sure what had actually happened in the supermarket, or if her words had truly reached Jack. However, she felt a lightness she hadn't felt in months, as if a weight had been lifted from her heart. Over time, Emily's life returned to normal, but the experience changed her in indelible ways. She had faced her fears, confronting the incomprehensible, and emerged stronger. The supermarket remained a part of the city, but for Emily, it became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that she looked into the darkness and found the light. Facing an ordeal that defied explanation, Emily learned the importance of seeking help and confronting one's fears, no matter how paranormal or unexplainable they may seem. Her story spread, becoming a beacon of hope for others experiencing their own unexplainable phenomena, reminding them that they are not alone and that sometimes courage and a willingness to face the unknown can bring peace. The supermarket continued to operate. Its aisles and freezers witnessed to a story that blurred the lines between this world and the next. Employees and customers alike felt a subtle shift, a sense of calm that hadn't been there before, as if acknowledging the peace Emily had fought so hard to achieve. As for Emily, she became an advocate for those experiencing paranormal harassment, sharing her story in forums and support groups, offering her insights and support. She realized that her encounter with Jack, while terrifying, had given her a purpose and a message to share. That love and determination can transcend even the boundaries of death, and that sometimes the most haunting mysteries have resolutions that bring not just closure, but healing. Her experience at the supermarket turned from a haunting memory to a pivotal chapter in her life, teaching her about the depths of the human spirit and the power of compassion. Emily's journey through fear and darkness into understanding and peace inspired many, showing that even in the face of the paranormal, one can find a way back to the light. Jessica worked as a cashier at a large city Walmart, hiding a secret that made her unique. She had the ability to foresee people's near future simply by making eye contact. It was a talent she had discovered as a child and had learned to manage discreetly, never revealing it to anyone. One day, like many others, among the numerous people who passed through her checkout, a young pregnant woman named Rachel appeared. Rachel radiated happiness, and her smile was contagious. As Jessica scanned her items, she began to exchange pleasantries with her, complimenting her appearance and the joy she seemed to carry with her. However, when their eyes met, Jessica had a sudden and shocking vision. She saw Rachel enveloped in a dark aura, with rapid, nefarious events unfolding in her life. She felt an urgent need to do something to help this stranger. After completing the transaction, Jessica felt compelled to do more. She decided to offer to read the tarot cards for Rachel, hoping to provide her with some warnings or advice that could help her navigate future dangers. Initially surprised, but then intrigued, Rachel accepted the invitation, drawn to the kindness and mystery surrounding the cashier. The tarot reading took place at Jessica's home, where the cards revealed a series of tragic events that would affect Rachel: betrayals, losses, and deceptions. Jessica advised her to be careful of the people in her life, especially those closest to her. As days passed, the predictions began to come true one after the other, leaving Rachel devastated and confused. In a moment of desperation, she decided to confront her ex-husband, David, whom she had left shortly before discovering she was pregnant. It was then that she discovered the truth. David, unable to accept the end of their relationship, had hired Jessica to instill fear and uncertainty in Rachel's life, hoping to ruin her emotionally and win her back by exploiting her vulnerability. Rachel, heartbroken, but now aware of the manipulation she had suffered, decided to face the situation with courage. With the help of trusted friends and legal support, she took actions to protect herself and her future child, promising to rebuild her life away from the darkness sown by David. Faced with a difficult choice when Jessica, the fortune teller who initially she believed was just a simple cashier, revealed she could remove the curse she had indirectly helped create for a price, of course. Jessica admitted she had been hired by David, but now claimed she was ready to help Rachel free herself from the adverse effects of her predictions, for an additional sum of money. This proposal threw Rachel into a sea of doubts. On one hand, she desperately wanted to free herself from any dark ties that might still weigh on her future, and that of the child she was carrying. On the other hand, the idea of paying more to someone she now considered a mercenary of the occult disgusted her. After sleepless nights of reflection and long discussions with her dearest friends, Rachel decided to reject Jessica's offer. But Jessica had another card to play. She offered to cast a curse on David as revenge for what he had done to Rachel. For a moment, Rachel's wounded heart wavered at the temptation to make David suffer as he had made her suffer. However, after careful reflection, she decided she did not want to stoop to his level. She did not want anger and the desire for revenge to define who she was or who she wanted to be, especially now that she was about to become a mother. Rachel communicated her decision not to proceed with either the removal of the curse or revenge against David to Jessica. Even though this meant living with the uncertainty of what the future might still hold for her, she felt it was the only way to maintain her dignity and build a positive future for herself and her baby. In the weeks and months that followed, Rachel worked hard to rebuild her life. She surrounded herself with positive and supportive people, dedicated time and resources to preparing for the arrival of her baby, and found comfort and strength in the small daily joys. Over time, fear and anxiety gave way to cautious hope and a renewed sense of personal power. As for David, Rachel chose to cut ties definitively, entrusting the matter to her lawyers to ensure he could no longer harm her in any way. She decided the best way to curse him was to live well, far from his toxic influence. In a quiet American suburb, Sarah worked as a cashier at a chain supermarket, appreciated by colleagues and customers alike for her always positive and helpful demeanor. Her personal life was equally fulfilling, shared with her husband Mike, a middle school teacher she deeply loved. However, the serenity of their existence was disturbed by the obsession of Nick, a new employee in the supermarket's fruit and vegetable department. Nick was a charismatic man, but his gaze sometimes became unsettling. From the first day he showed a particular interest in Sarah, which she kindly rejected, explaining that she was happily married. Despite this, Nick did not accept the refusal and began to look for increasingly invasive ways to insert himself into Sarah's life, from stalking her home to sending inappropriate messages and unwanted gifts. The situation escalated one evening when Nick, blinded by jealousy and obsession, planned to assault Mike to remove him from Sarah's life. He waited for Mike in the supermarket parking lot, armed with a knife. The assault was violent and sudden. Nick struck Mike from behind as he was putting groceries in the car. Fortunately, the attack was not fatal. Mike managed to defend himself, although he suffered serious injuries. Sarah, who had just finished her shift, came out in time to see Nick flee and find Mike injured on the ground. In a panic, she cried for help, attracting the attention of some passersby who immediately called for emergency services. Mike was rushed to the hospital, where doctors were able to stabilize him and save his life. The police began their investigation, and thanks to testimonies from other employees and recordings from the supermarket's security cameras, it was possible to reconstruct the incident and arrest Nick. During the interrogation, Nick admitted his plan to eliminate Mike, convinced that without him, he would have had a chance with Sarah. Sarah spent the following nights in the hospital, watching over Mike while grappling with the fear and distress of what had happened. Their lives had been overturned by an unprovoked obsession and an act of incomprehensible violence. However, despite the pain and fear, Sarah and Mike found comfort in each other, strengthening the bond between them. Once discharged from the hospital, Mike took several months to fully recover, both physically and emotionally. Meanwhile, Sarah decided to leave her job at the supermarket, unable to return to the place that had brought her so much pain. Together, they made the decision to move to another city, seeking to leave the horrors they experienced behind and start a new chapter in their lives. Nick was tried and sentenced to several years in prison for attempted murder and stalking. The story of Sarah and Mike became a case study in awareness campaigns against domestic violence and stalking, highlighting the importance of legal and psychological support for victims. Tamara, a woman in her 30s with a quiet and ordinary life, found herself suddenly plunged into a waking nightmare. It was a seemingly ordinary day, a simple errand at the neighborhood Walmart to buy a birthday present for her niece. But among the sterile and brightly lit aisles, Tamara stumbled upon a sight that shook her to the core. A ghost woman. The woman, middle-aged, with disheveled gray hair, wandered aimlessly through the supermarket, humming in an incomprehensible melody and gesturing as if she were talking to someone who wasn't there. Tamara, terrified and fascinated at the same time, approached the woman to offer help. But it was as if she didn't even hear her. Her gaze was lost in the void. Her eyes bulged out of her sockets, and her face was pulled into a grimace of terror. Tamara walked away shaken, looking for a clerk who could help her. But when they returned to the spot where she had seen the ghost woman, she had vanished into thin air. The clerk, a corpulent and bored man, didn't believe her and dismissed the incident as a hallucination. In the following days, Tamara couldn't sleep at night. The image of the ghost woman haunted her, and her unease grew with each passing day. She began researching online, looking for stories similar to the one she had experienced. She found several cases of people who had seen ghosts in supermarkets, malls, and other public spaces. Increasingly convinced that she had seen a ghost, Tamara delved into the history of the Walmart. She discovered that the supermarket had been built on the site of an ancient Indian cemetery, which had been desecrated to make way for the shopping center. Legend has it that the spirits of the departed Indians had never found peace and still wandered the area, tormenting the living. Tamara was determined to learn more about the ghost woman and her lost child. She turned to an old bookseller, known for his knowledge of local folklore, who told her the tragic story of a mother who had lost her little boy in a fire that had devastated the supermarket many years earlier. She still wandered the aisles, searching for her son who was never found. Tamara felt guilty for disturbing the ghost woman and became convinced that the only way to help her was to find her child and give her a proper burial. With the help of the bookseller, who turned out to be an expert in the paranormal, Tamara organized a ritual to evoke the spirit of the child. The ritual was held at night, in the basement of the supermarket, among the ruins of the old Indian cemetery. Tamara, with her heart pounding, uttered the magic words and waited with trepidation. Suddenly, the air turned cold, and a thick fog enveloped the room. A heartbreaking cry echoed in the darkness, followed by a small, luminous figure that materialized in front of her. It was the ghost boy, who with a sad smile pointed to a specific spot on the floor. Tamara dug frantically and found a small skeleton, wrapped in a white dress. With tears in her eyes, Tamara buried the child in a simple and moving ceremony. From the day Tamara gave the child a proper burial, the ghost woman never appeared to her again. The supermarket returned to being a quiet and ordinary place. Tamara, however, would never be the same. The experience had changed her deeply, making her more aware of the thin line that separates life from death, the real from the supernatural. Darkness enveloped the San Diego Walmart like a shroud. The neon lights, turned off one by one, left only the dim glow of emergency lights to illuminate the deserted aisles. An eerie silence reigned, broken only by the hum of the refrigerating machinery and the rustle of autumn leaves blowing against the windows. Michael, a middle-aged janitor with a passion for poetry and a sensitive soul, woke up with a start in his storage room. A faint moan, almost a whisper, had torn him from sleep. He looked around, confused and disoriented. The darkness was pitch black, and the only light came from a thin strip that filtered under the door. Driven by an irresistible curiosity, Michael got up and approached the door. He pressed his ear to the wood and listened intently. The moan became clearer, a female voice pleading from somewhere in the supermarket. "Help!" Michael stiffened. The voice was faint, but laden with pain and anguish. A shiver ran down his spine. Who could it be? And why were they still in the supermarket at that hour? Armed with only an old mop and his courage, Michael opened the door and ventured into the darkness. The moan grew louder, guiding him like a lifeline through the deserted aisles. The cold air pinched his skin, while a sense of unease grew within him. Illuminated by the dim glow of an emergency light, a female figure stood among the crates of fruit and vegetables. She was a young woman, with long brown hair and a face as pale as the moon. Her eyes were wide and staring, filled with an infinite sadness. Michael stood speechless, petrified with fear. The woman was dressed in a white dress, stained with dirt and blood. Her hands were cold and trembling.
"Help me,"
she pleaded in a whisper. A strangled scream erupted from Michael's throat. He turned and ran away, terrified. The woman's moan chased him into his nightmares throughout the night. The following days were a torment for Michael. He couldn't forget the ghost woman and her heartbreaking plea. He was torn between fear and guilt. He had to help her, but how? Michael began investigating the ghost woman. He searched for information online, consulted books on the paranormal, and questioned his colleagues. No one knew anything about a woman who died in the supermarket, but everyone agreed that the produce department was haunted by disturbing presences. Driven by an invincible force, Michael returned to the produce department. The ghost woman was still there, waiting. This time, Michael didn't run away. He approached her cautiously and asked, "Who are you? What happened to you?" The woman told Michael her tragic story. She had been a college student, brutally murdered by a maniac right in the supermarket. Her body had never been found. Michael listened to the ghost woman's story with compassion. He promised to help her find peace and catch her killer. Together, they began an investigation to uncover the truth and finally bring justice to the woman. Michael and the ghost woman, who introduced herself as Sarah, combed through the supermarket looking for clues. Sarah remembered little of her murder, just a man with cold eyes and a shiny blade. Michael, using his knowledge of the supermarket and his intuition, tried to reconstruct the events of her tragic death. After days of fruitless searching, Michael found a hidden trapdoor in the back of the produce department. The trapdoor led to a dark and dusty basement, which the employees never accessed, and where Michael found an old trunk. Inside the trunk were Sarah's remains, along with a diary that told her story and the identity of her killer, the owner of the supermarket. Michael confronted the owner of the supermarket, an arrogant and unscrupulous man. Michael reported everything to the police. The man, caught red-handed, confessed to Sarah's murder and the murders of other women. He was arrested and sentenced to life in prison. With the capture of the killer, Sarah finally found peace. Her soul was finally able to rest, and her ghost vanished into thin air. Michael, though scarred by the experience, felt relieved to have helped bring justice to Sarah. Michael returned to his old life, but the experience with the ghost woman changed him forever. He had learned that the world is a mysterious place, and that sometimes the line between life and death is thinner than we think. He had also learned that courage and compassion are the most powerful weapons against injustice and evil. The sun lazily set over the small town of Springdale, Arkansas, casting a pink glow on the wooden facades of the houses and the large Walmart supercenter parking lot. Inside, Sophia, a young college student with brown hair tied in a ponytail, was busy shopping for the week. As she walked through the brightly lit aisles, Sophia felt herself being watched. A shiver ran down her spine, but she convinced herself that it was just her imagination. She was an intelligent and rational girl. She didn't believe in ghosts or stalkers. Yet, in the following days, the feeling of being followed became more insistent. A fleeting shadow at the edge of her vision. A rustling of clothes between the shelves that had no explanation. A silent step behind her that made her jump. Initially, Sophia tried to ignore these signs, dismissing them as stress from studying. But her anxiety grew day by day, turning into a constant fear that robbed her of sleep and concentration. One afternoon, while in the grocery department, Sophia turned around and saw a man staring at her from a distance. He was tall and thin, with a pale face and dark hair that covered his eyes. A chill ran down her spine. She was sure she had seen him before, but she couldn't remember where. Terrified, Sophia quickened her pace, trying to lose the man. She hid between the shelves, then headed for the checkout counter with her heart pounding in her throat. As she waited her turn, Sophia glanced over her shoulder furtively. The man was still there, a few feet away, staring at her with a disturbing intensity. When it was her turn, Sophia paid for her groceries and ran out of the Walmart, not even taking her shopping bag. The man followed her quickly, swallowed by the darkness of the parking lot. Sophia started to run, the terror giving her the strength to overcome her limits. The man was getting closer, his heavy breathing brushing the back of her neck. Sophia stumbled over a hole and fell to the ground, screaming in terror. The man reached her and grabbed her arm, squeezing with inhuman strength.
"I finally found you,"
he whispered in a hoarse voice, an evil smile contorting his face. Sophia struggled to free herself, but it was useless. The man threatened her not to scream and to leave the supermarket together as if they had known each other for a long time. Outside the Walmart, he dragged her towards a white van parked at the back of the lot. He threw her inside and locked the door. Sophia was in the dark, trapped in a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. The van started up, the roar of the engine amplifying her terror. Sophia was in a panic. She thrashed furiously, trying to open the van door, but it was impossible. Tears streamed down her face as she prayed for a miracle. After a journey that seemed to last an eternity, the van stopped. Sophia heard the man get out of the vehicle and then approach her door. A glimmer of hope flickered in her heart. Maybe the man would let her go. But hope was quickly extinguished when the man opened the door and leaned in brandishing a knife with a gleaming blade.
"It's time to play,"
he said with a cruel smile. Sophia huddled in a corner, terrified. The man approached, the knife shining in the dim light of the van. Sophia prepared for the worst, closing her eyes and praying for a quick death. But suddenly, a metallic clang echoed through the van. The man turned around sharply, a look of surprise on his face. Sophia opened her eyes and saw a tall, burly figure standing in front of her. It was the security guard who had been assigned to her after her reports. The guard had pointed his gun at the man, who was motionless, the knife still in his hand.
"Let her go!"
the guard shouted in a thunderous voice. The man hesitated for a moment, then lunged at the guard. The two men fought furiously, the van turning into a battlefield. Sophia huddled in a corner, trying to protect herself from the blows and screams. The terror was now a piercing pain that permeated every fiber of her body. After an exhausting fight, the guard managed to disarm the man and pin him to the ground. Sophia stood up trembling, her legs weak under the weight of the terror that had gripped her. The guard reached her and wrapped her in a protective hug. "It's over," he said in a reassuring voice. "You're safe." Sophia cried for a long time, releasing all the fear and tension that had accumulated in her body. The guard, a kind and compassionate man named John, let her cry until she was exhausted. When Sophia finally calmed down, John took her to his office and offered her a cup of hot tea. As she sipped the tea, Sophia told John everything that had happened to her, from the first time she felt she was being followed to the terrifying kidnapping attempt. John listened attentively, his face grim with determination. When Sophia was finished, he promised her that he would do everything in his power to protect her and bring the man to justice. John kept his word. He worked tirelessly with the police to investigate the case and track down the stalker. They interviewed witnesses, reviewed security footage, and searched for clues. After a week of relentless investigation, the police finally caught a break. They identified the stalker as a former employee of Walmart, who had been fired for inappropriate behavior towards female customers. The man had a history of mental illness and violence, and he was known to frequent the Walmart where Sophia had been shopping. The police arrested the man and charged him with stalking, kidnapping, and attempted murder. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison. The trial was a difficult experience for Sophia, but she was determined to see justice done. She testified bravely against the man, recounting the details of her ordeal in a clear and concise voice. The jury was moved by Sophia's testimony, and they found the man guilty without a doubt. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the trial, Sophia felt a sense of relief and closure. She knew that the man would never be able to hurt her again. She also knew that she had done the right thing by coming forward and testifying against him. Sophia's story is a reminder that we should never be afraid to speak up against injustice. She is a courageous young woman who stood up for herself and helped bring a dangerous criminal to justice. The sun lazily set over the chaotic expanse of parked cars in front of the Target in San Jose, California. Emily, exhausted after a day of work, pushed the cart with one hand. While the other, she held tightly the hand of her little son, Luca, 4 years old. The child, with his lively and curious eyes, was attracted to every sparkle and bright color in the supermarket. While Emily lingered to choose the fruit, Luca stopped in front of a candy display, captivated by the images of gummy bears and lollipops. Emily looked at him for a moment, smiling at his innocent gluttony, then turned to get a bag. It was only a moment, a blink of an eye. When she turned back, Luca was gone. Panic gripped Emily's heart like an icy vice. She called his name loudly, scanning every corner of the department, but there was no sign of Luca. The crowd of people around her seemed like an indistinct blur of alien and indifferent faces. Desperate, Emily turned to the supermarket staff, who immediately alerted the police. The search started in a hurry, involving officers, sniffer dogs, and volunteers. The Target parking lot was combed inch by inch, while Luca's photo, with his blonde hair and blue eyes, bounced on the news and social media. The hours passed, turning into an endless nightmare. Emily couldn't sleep, eat, or think of anything but her child. She prayed, imploring the heavens to bring him home safe and sound. After 36 hours of agonizing waiting, an unexpected twist. A Target cashier, suspicious of a man who was entering and leaving the supermarket obsessively, had followed him undercover. The man had entered the parking lot, approached a car, and tried to open the back door. The cashier, sure it was a kidnapping, had called the police. The officers who intervened on the spot had blocked the man and found Luca hidden in the back seat of the car. The child was unharmed, but scared, still under the effect of a sedative that had been administered to him. The joy of finding Luca was immense. Emily hugged her child, flooding him with tears of joy and relief. The pain and fear she had experienced in recent days turned into deep gratitude for having found him safe and sound. The man who had tried to kidnap Luca was arrested and charged with kidnapping. The investigation revealed he was an individual with a criminal record for crimes against minors. The trial against the man was a tough test for Emily. She had to relive every moment of terror, every anguish, every shattered hope. But her tenacity and her desire for justice gave her the strength to face her tormentor, to look him in the eye, and to testify against him. The man was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a sentence that could not erase the pain of Emily and Luca, but which represented an act of justice and a warning against pedophilia and the exploitation of minors. The investigation revealed an even more chilling detail. The man was a follower of a satanic cult that practiced black magic rituals. He had tried to kidnap Luca to sacrifice him during a macabre ritual in the hope of obtaining dark powers. The discovery shocked the community. People were in disbelief in the face of such cruelty and obscurantism. Emily, already tried by her experience, found herself facing a new nightmare. The thought that her son had been one step away from a horrible death tormented her day and night. Despite the pain, Emily found the strength to react. She joined a group of people who fight against satanic cults and black magic. Together, they began to raise public awareness of these dangers, often underestimated. The story of Emily and Luca is a reminder not to underestimate the danger of certain individuals and certain practices. It teaches us that evil can also hide behind the most banal faces and that our vigilance is essential to protect our children. Furthermore, this story reminds us that the strength of motherly love and solidarity can overcome even the most difficult challenges. Emily and Luca survived a nightmare thanks to their courage and the support of those who helped them. Their story is a message of hope for all those who have experienced traumatic events. The cold night air enveloped the Target like a shroud. The once bright neon lights now emitted a dim and ghostly light, creating long shadows that writhed on the walls and floor. The aisles, once bustling with customers, were now silent and empty, except for the distant hum of a refrigeration machine that pulsed rhythmically in the darkness. Ethan, the night janitor, walked around with his metal cart, checking that the doors were closed and the cash registers were turned off. He was a middle-aged man with a face marked by fatigue and years. His eyes, once lively, were now dull and opaque, as if he had seen too many things in his life. He had worked at Walmart for almost 20 years, and he knew every corner of that supermarket like the back of his hand. Every shelf, every aisle, every product had its place in his memory, a mental map that guided him in the darkness of the night. As he walked down the food aisle, his gaze was caught by a shadow moving quickly between the shelves. He stopped, his heart pounding in his throat. A shiver of cold ran down his spine. Not the icy cold of the night, but a deeper, more sinister cold, as if an invisible presence was watching him. The shadow stopped and turned towards him. Ethan held his breath. He was a bearded man with long, dirty hair that framed his face like a wild mane. His yellow eyes shone in the darkness like those of a wolf, emanating an eerie and disturbing light. His face was emaciated, marked by deep wrinkles and a thick, unkempt beard. He wore tattered, dirty clothes, which emanated a pungent odor of sweat and mold. Ethan suddenly felt vulnerable, alone in that maze of silent aisles. His cart creaked ominously with each step, amplifying his sense of unease. A lump of fear formed in his throat, making it difficult to breathe. What are you doing here?" Ethan asked with a trembling voice, trying to remain calm. The bearded man looked at him with a sinister smile, revealing yellow and ruined teeth.
"I am just waiting,"
he replied in a hoarse voice, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. Waiting for what?" Ethan asked, increasingly worried.
"The right moment,"
the bearded man replied, with an enigmatic tone that chilled Ethan's blood. Ethan didn't understand what the man meant, but he knew it wasn't a good thing. A sense of terror gripped him, as if an imminent danger was threatening him. He turned and tried to escape, but the bearded man was right behind him. Ethan ran through the dark aisles, the bearded man chasing him like a fury. His cart overturned, hitting the shelves, knocking over cans and boxes that resounded in the silence with a deafening din. His panting, mixed with the creaking of the cart and the noise of his footsteps, creating a cacophony of terror that echoed through the empty supermarket. Ethan felt the bearded man's hand grab his shoulder, an iron grip that paralyzed him, as if a grip of ice that had blocked his body. He turned and looked him in the eyes, terrified. His yellow eyes shone with an evil light, as if he were possessed by a demonic force. The bearded man pushed him against a metal shelf, with inhuman strength that crushed him against the cold sheets. Ethan tried to defend himself, but it was like fighting a bear. His hand, calloused and ruined by work, clenched against the bearded man's powerful arms, trying in vain to free himself from his grip. The bearded man looked at him with a cruel smile, as his bristly beard rubbed against Ethan's face.
"You have no escape,"
he said in a hoarse voice, as if he were pronouncing a death sentence. Ethan felt the terror rise in his throat, a wave of panic that was about to overwhelm him. His vision blurred, his muscles weakened, and the pressure of the bearded man's hand on his throat became increasingly strong. In a last desperate attempt to save himself, Ethan grabbed a can of preserves that had fallen to the ground during his escape. With all his strength, he lifted it and hit the bearded man on the head with violence. The bearded man staggered back, stunned by the blow. Ethan took advantage of this to free himself from his grip and ran again. The pain in his shoulder was excruciating, but the adrenaline gave him the strength to continue. Ethan ran out of breath, the bearded man chasing him like a madman. The aisles of Walmart turned into a labyrinth of shadows and terrors, where every corner hid a danger. Ethan felt the bearded man getting closer, his heavy breathing blowing on his neck. He knew he couldn't keep running forever. It was only a matter of time before he caught him. Desperate, Ethan looked for an exit, a way out of this nightmare. He turned around and saw a half-open door at the end of the corridor. It was an emergency exit, his only hope of survival. Ethan ran towards the door with all his strength, the bearded man now only a few steps away. He threw open the door and rushed outside, into the darkness of the night. The fresh air filled his lungs, making him feel the life coursing through his veins. He had survived. He looked back, but the bearded man was gone. He had disappeared into the night, as if he had never existed. Ethan stood there, trembling and terrified for a few minutes. Then, he walked to his car and drove away from the Walmart, leaving that nightmare behind. Ethan never went back to that Walmart. That night, he had seen evil in the face, and he had only survived by a miracle. The trauma of that experience haunted him forever, leaving a deep wound in his soul. He never told anyone what had happened, too afraid to be believed. He simply changed jobs, finding one that didn't require him to work at night. But every time night fell, Ethan would think back to that bearded man, his yellow eyes and his cruel smile. And he knew that, in a dark corner of his heart, the terror of that night would remain forever. It was a seemingly ordinary Thursday afternoon at the Target supermarket in Springdale, Arkansas. The Anderson family, consisting of John, Sarah, and their 10-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan, were doing their weekly shopping. Among other things, John had picked up a pound of ground beef from the butcher's department, oblivious to the macabre fate that awaited them. That evening, Sarah prepared dinner with the ground beef, cooking meatballs in sauce that the whole family devoured with gusto. It seemed like a normal family dinner, happy and carefree. However, a few hours later, the first symptoms of illness began to appear. John was the first to feel nauseous, followed by Sarah and the children. The symptoms quickly intensified: stomach cramps, vomiting, and high fever. Terrified, they called an ambulance that rushed them to the emergency room. At the hospital, the diagnosis was terrifying: salmonella poisoning. The ground beef they had bought at Target was contaminated with the bacteria, which had caused severe intoxication in the entire family. The doctors put them under observation, administering antibiotics and IVs to combat the infection. Fortunately, after a few days in the hospital, the Anderson family recovered. However, the traumatic experience had left them deeply scarred. Not only had they suffered terribly from the poisoning, but they were also disturbed by the thought that the contaminated meat could have been purchased by other customers, unaware of the danger. The authorities launched an investigation to uncover the cause of the contamination. They inspected the Target supermarket and seized several batches of ground beef. Laboratory tests confirmed the presence of salmonella in these samples. The police questioned the employees in the butcher's department, but none of them admitted to contaminating the meat. The investigation stalled for several weeks, until a small detail caught the attention of the investigators. One employee, a young butcher's assistant named Kevin, had been absent from work the day the contaminated ground beef was sold. Furthermore, he had recently been in mourning for the death of his mother, an event that had deeply troubled him. Subjected to more intense interrogation, Kevin confessed to his crime. In the grip of grief and anger at the loss of his mother, he had decided to take revenge by contaminating the supermarket's ground beef, with the intent of causing the death of innocent people. Kevin's plan was diabolical and cruel. He had injected the salmonella bacteria into the ground beef, certain that it would cause serious illness to anyone who consumed it. His madness had led him to commit an act of food terrorism, with potentially devastating consequences. Kevin's confession shocked the Springdale community. The Anderson family, still recovering from the poisoning, found themselves facing a new wave of pain and anger. How could they forgive a man who had caused so much suffering with such a vile act? The trial against Kevin was swift and severe. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison for attempted multiple murder and food poisoning. His sentence could certainly not erase the pain of his victims, but it served to send a signal of justice and protect the community from future tragedies. However, Kevin's confession did not end the nightmare for the community. Further investigation revealed an even more chilling detail. Kevin had sent the contaminated meat not only to the Target in Springdale, but also to other supermarkets in the area. His aim was to amplify his act of terror and cause as many victims as possible. The discovery panicked the surrounding communities. The authorities issued a food alert and seized the contaminated ground beef from all the supermarkets involved. However, it was difficult to estimate the number of people who had already consumed it. In the following weeks, several cases of salmonella poisoning occurred in various neighboring areas. Not all cases were linked to Kevin's plan, but the possibility that the contaminated meat had caused others suffering was agonizing. To this day, it is not known for sure how many people were poisoned by Kevin's contaminated meat. His act of madness caused pain and suffering to many families, leaving a deep wound in the community.